Theresienstadt occupies a complicated and haunting place within the history of the Second World War and the Holocaust. Known in Czech as Terezín, this former garrison town was transformed by Nazi authorities into something that defied easy categorization. At once a ghetto, a transit camp, a tool of propaganda, and ultimately a way station to the extermination camps in the east. To understand Theresienstadt is to explore a microcosm of the broader deception, cruelty, and bureaucratic engineering that defined the Nazi persecution of Europe's Jews. But it is also to recognize the remarkable resilience of a community that, despite being surrounded by despair and death, cultivated a vibrant cultural life as an act of defiance and human survival. As one begins to look deeper into Theresienstadt's layered history, it becomes clear that the camp was not simply a place, but a stage upon which Nazi ideology, Jewish resilience, and the tragedies of war collided. It serves as a testament to how a seemingly ordinary space, a military town with symmetrical streets and old brickwork, could be reshaped into an instrument of persecution. Yet the people forced into this place shaped their own parallel world within it, a world of hope, sorrow, creativity, and survival. The contradiction of Theresienstadt lies at the heart of its story. It was a place intended to break the human spirit, and yet, against every intention of its creators, it became a center of cultural brilliance. The story begins long before the first transports arrived. Theresienstadt was built at the end of the 18th century by the Habsburg Empire as a fortress town. Its original purpose was military, an organized grid of streets surrounded by thick walls, barracks, and defensive outworks. For most of its existence, it served as a quiet garrison settlement rather than a strategic bulwark. This architectural legacy mattered greatly because when Nazi Germany occupied Czechoslovakia in March of 1939, the town's capacity to house large numbers of people, combined with its enclosed layout, made it an ideal site for the purposes the Germans envisioned. What began as a military town would soon become a prison. The fortress design, with its imposing ramparts and self-contained layout, had once been meant to repel foreign armies, but under Nazi rule it repelled freedom itself. Buildings intended for soldiers and officers became holding pens for civilians. Streets meant for military logistics became choke points for movement and food distribution. What had once been an emblem of imperial engineering was now repurposed into a cage crafted through administrative cruelty. The irony was profound. A fortress meant to protect citizens from external threats became the mechanism through which thousands were trapped by their own occupiers. The decision to turn Theresienstadt into a ghetto emerged gradually as the Nazis refined their strategy for dealing with European Jewry. In the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, where the town was located, the Jewish population faced escalating persecution. Policies of registration, exclusion from professions, forced labor, confiscation of property, and humiliating restrictions intensified as the war progressed. Meanwhile, German authorities sought ways to solve logistical problems arising from mass deportations. A central issue was what to do with elderly Jews, decorated veterans of World War I, prominent cultural figures, and others whose immediate deportation to extermination camps might attract international attention. Theresienstadt appeared to offer a solution, a place to contain these individuals while maintaining the illusion of humane treatment. To the outside world, the Nazis portrayed Theresienstadt as a benevolent project, a retirement settlement for aging Jews who had contributed to the empire and deserved peace. But this was deception on a grand scale. The Nazis understood the value of appearances, especially as whispers of genocide spread. By placing well-known artists, intellectuals, and war veterans in Theresienstadt, they created a facade they could point to whenever accusations of mass murder surfaced. This was not compassion. It was calculated misdirection designed to obscure the true horrors occurring across occupied Europe. In late 1941, the SS designated the town as a ghetto labor camp for Jews from the Protectorate and, soon after, Jews from Germany, Austria, and other territories. The first transports arrived in November. Residents of the existing Czech population were forcibly expelled from their homes to make way for the incoming prisoners. Overnight, a functioning town was transformed into an overcrowded holding area. As the Nazi Reichskommissariat drafted plans, the camp's official mission statement presented Theresienstadt as a retirement settlement where elderly Jews could live in relative comfort. The reality was starkly different. Within weeks, the camp became a scene of misery. New arrivals often found themselves forced into barracks without mattresses, blankets, or adequate heating. People who had lived respectable lives, teachers, doctors, judges, musicians, storekeepers, were reduced overnight to sleeping on wooden planks and surviving off minimal rations. The contrast between the propaganda and the actual living conditions was staggering. More tragically, many elderly prisoners died within days or weeks, unprepared for the physical strain of ghetto life. For them, Theresienstadt was not a retirement settlement, but a waiting room for death. Theresienstadt's cruel design lay in its dual identity. It was both a ghetto where Jews were confined under Jewish council administration and a transit point, from which deportations to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and other extermination sites departed with regularity. The majority of Jews who passed through Theresienstadt did not survive the war. Yet at the same time, inside its walls, a cultural life bloomed that has left historians with a remarkable archive of artistic and intellectual work produced under unimaginable pressure. This paradox has puzzled and moved researchers for decades. How could a place engineered for suffering become a center of creativity? Part of the answer lies in the unique demographics of the camp. Because the Nazis deliberately sent artists, scholars, scientists, and performers there, Theresienstadt became a gathering point for some of the most talented figures of Central European Jewish society. These individuals, stripped of their freedom and dignity, often turned to their crafts as a means of mental survival. Their art was more than expression, it was resistance. Every poem, every piece of music, every sketch was a quiet assertion of humanity against a system built to erase it. Understanding daily life in Theresienstadt requires a close examination of the camp's internal structure. The SS oversaw the camp from the outside, but within the walls, the Jewish Council of Elders, under compulsion and without true authority, administered most aspects of daily activity. This council faced impossible ethical dilemmas. They were forced to organize labor, manage rationing, select individuals for deportation transports, and enforce orders that served the machinery of genocide. Though they attempted to mitigate suffering, they operated with little power to resist the SS and no real control over the fate of the prisoners. The Jewish Council's role remains one of the most painful elements of Holocaust history. These individuals, themselves prisoners, were forced into positions where any choice they made would cause harm. Some tried to shield the vulnerable, others believed obedience might buy time. All were trapped in a system designed to produce moral compromise. Survivor testimonies reveal the torment council members experienced as they signed deportation lists or denied rations, knowing full well the consequences. Their story is a reminder that in totalitarian systems, power is often delegated to the oppressed, turning victims into unwilling participants in their own persecution. The physical environment of Theresienstadt was defined by overcrowding from the outset. Barracks originally intended for soldiers now held hundreds of people in each building, often stacked in bunks 3 levels high, sometimes sleeping on straw mats or the bare floor. Air circulation was poor. Sanitation was inadequate, with lavatories ill-equipped for the greatly expanded population. Disease spread easily, especially in the harsh winters of Central Europe. Food rations were minimal, consisting primarily of watery soup, bread, and occasional small supplements of vegetables or ersatz coffee. Malnutrition weakened immune systems and contributed to high mortality rates, particularly among the elderly. Conditions varied slightly depending on barracks, labor assignments, and time period, but overall life was dominated by scarcity. Water was rationed, toilets overflowed, lice, fleas, and bedbugs were constant companions. Prisoners often recalled the pervasive smell, a mix of sweat, sickness, damp wood, and coal smoke. Clothing wore out quickly, and many had only one set of garments. Shoes disintegrated. Winters were agonizingly cold, and summers unbearably hot. Yet in these same spaces, people gathered to whisper songs, hold lectures, and plan performances. The human need for connection persisted even where the body was most vulnerable. Despite these appalling conditions, life inside the ghetto did not follow a simple linear narrative of decay. The arrival of so many educated, accomplished individuals produced a unique cultural landscape. Among the prisoners were musicians, composers, writers, scholars, teachers, and artists. They brought with them not only their professional skills, but a determination to maintain their identity and dignity through culture. The camp became known as a paradoxical ghetto, a place of starvation and deprivation, yet simultaneously the site of remarkable artistic output. Music was especially prominent. Concerts, though officially prohibited at first, began to take place covertly and later were allowed by the authorities, who realized they could exploit such performances for propaganda. Composer Gideon Klein organized ensembles and composed new works during his imprisonment. Victor Ullmann, a composer of exceptional talent, wrote operas, sonatas, and essays on the significance of art in times of oppression. Perhaps the most famous musical work associated with Theresienstadt is the children's opera Brundibar, composed by Hans Krase. The opera was performed numerous times in the camp, bringing joy to the children who sang and a momentary escape from grim reality. Yet even Brundibar carries the tragic weight of the ghetto. Most of the children who participated were later sent to Auschwitz and murdered. These performances were not mere distractions, they were lifelines. Prisoners described how, for an hour or two, they could forget the barbed wire and the hunger and lose themselves in melody. The camp orchestra rehearsed with instruments that were falling apart. Sheet music was copied by hand. Concertgoers packed themselves into overcrowded halls, sitting shoulder to shoulder, knowing that any day they might be transported east. In this way, art became a defiant affirmation that cultural identity could not be extinguished, even when the creators themselves faced annihilation. Visual art also flourished, though in a more clandestine fashion. Painters and illustrators documented daily life, creating depictions of the overcrowded rooms, food lines, illness, and forced labor details that formed the fabric of existence in the ghetto. The Nazis allowed some artistic activity, particularly when it could serve their narrative of a self-governing Jewish settlement, but many artworks were created secretly and hidden from guards. Felix Bloch, Bedřich Fritter, Otto Ungar, and many others produced drawings that are now invaluable historical testimony. Some artists were discovered and punished for their unauthorized depictions. Bedřich Fritter, for instance, was arrested and subjected to torture before ultimately being deported to Auschwitz. Many of these artworks survived only because fellow prisoners hid them in walls, under floorboards, or in buried containers. When the war ended, these hidden caches were uncovered, revealing hundreds of sketches showing emaciated figures, crowded bunks, and the weary faces of laborers. These images contrast sharply with the staged propaganda photographs the Nazis produced. While the regime wanted to show smiling children and lively cafes, the artists of Theresienstadt captured starvation, grief, and exhaustion. Their courage ensured that future generations could see the truth. Children in Theresienstadt formed a world of their own. Deprived of proper schooling and subjected to hunger and fear, they nonetheless created a vibrant informal culture. Secret classes were organized and children's magazines circulated, filled with poems, stories, and drawings. The best-known compilation of children's expression from Theresienstadt comes from the preserved poems and artwork of the camp's young residents, later published after the war. These writings reveal a heartbreaking mix of innocence, longing, dread, and hope. They are among the most poignant testimonies of life under Nazi persecution. Many of the children's poems spoke longingly of home, homes they would never see again. Others dreamed of open fields, sunlight, and food. Some expressed confusion about why they were imprisoned at all. Their drawings often depicted butterflies, birds, and dreams of freedom, symbols that took on added meaning given their circumstances. Teachers and caretakers in the camp worked tirelessly to give the children a semblance of education, using scraps of paper and charcoal. This nurturing of imagination was yet another form of defiance, an insistence that the next generation deserved a future, even if the present was bleak. If you're finding this documentary informative so far and want more deep historical content, please take a moment to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. It helps this channel grow and allows me to bring you more long-form documentaries. The camp's cultural life did not emerge because conditions were tolerable. Rather, it emerged precisely because conditions were intolerable. Creativity became a form of psychological and spiritual resistance. It allowed prisoners to assert their humanity in the face of a system designed to erase it. In lectures, musicians' notebooks, and theatrical scripts, we find expressions of defiance, not overt rebellion, but a refusal to accept dehumanization. Cultural activity in Theresienstadt was also a means of preserving memory in real time. Prisoners knew they might not survive, but their writings, drawings, and compositions could. Many viewed their work as messages to the future, a way of saying, "We were here, and this is what was done to us." This awareness amplified their determination to create. Even in the darkest conditions, the human drive to communicate and bear witness endured. Yet all of this cultural vitality took place under the shadow of deportation. From January 1942 onward, transports departed from Theresienstadt with relentless frequency. Jews were sent east under the euphemistic designation of resettlement. Families were torn apart. Many were forced onto transports with only a few hours' notice. The SS transported thousands at a time, filling freight cars bound for Auschwitz-Birkenau and other killing centers. Survivors later described the pervasive fear of hearing one's name on a transport list, a fear that turned every day into a precarious negotiation with fate. The sense of dread was constant. People slept uneasily, knowing that lists were often posted at dawn. Rumors circulated endlessly. Who might be next, where the trains were going, whether anyone had heard from previous deportees. Most knew deep in their hearts that resettlement was a lie, but clung to small hopes because the alternative was unbearable. Parents tried to shield their children, sometimes volunteering for transports in the hope of staying together. These agonizing decisions left lasting scars on the survivors. The elderly, who made up a significant portion of the camp's population, suffered the most. Many died in the ghetto from starvation, disease, or exhaustion, even before being deported. In its early months, mortality rates in Theresienstadt were catastrophic. The Nazis' decision to funnel elderly Jews to the camp was not driven by humanitarian concern, but by the cold calculus of optics. They wished to maintain appearances for the outside world while continuing their genocidal policies. For elderly prisoners, the transition from their former lives to the harshness of the ghetto was especially traumatic. Many had been respected professionals, community leaders, or decorated soldiers who had fought for the very nations that now persecuted them. To be reduced to living in overcrowded barracks, queuing for thin soup, and struggling just to stand was a humiliation layered atop physical suffering. Their deaths were often quiet, unnoticed except by fellow prisoners, yet each represented a world of memories extinguished. Theresienstadt's role in Nazi propaganda reached its peak in 1944. Reports of atrocities against Jews had begun to circulate internationally. Neutral nations and humanitarian organizations pressured Germany for transparency. In response, the SS orchestrated a grotesque deception. They renovated parts of Theresienstadt to create the illusion of a model settlement. Streets were cleaned, flower beds planted, shops stocked with goods that were never regularly available, and new cultural venues established. Prisoners were coerced into beautifying the camp, rehearsing staged activities, and appearing content. This charade was meticulously planned. The Nazis understood the power of imagery. They created fake storefronts filled with borrowed goods. Cafes were stocked with pastries no prisoner was allowed to eat. Classrooms were staged with supplies that were removed as soon as inspectors left. Even the children who performed in Brundibar were dressed in clean clothes for the occasion. The entire camp became a theatre set, designed to mislead the world into believing that Jews under Nazi control were being treated humanely. This charade was intended for a specific audience, the International Committee of the Red Cross. When Red Cross delegates visited in June 1944, the Nazis carefully controlled their movements, steering them through selected areas and preventing meaningful contact with prisoners who might reveal the truth. The visitors saw a school, cafes, musical performances, and children playing outdoors. Many were misled, though some suspected a facade. Still, the Nazis deemed the operation successful enough to escalate their propaganda. They produced a film titled "The Führer Gives a City to the Jews." Directed by a prisoner, Kurt Gerren, himself a prominent actor and filmmaker who was forced to participate under threat, the film portrayed Theresienstadt as an idyllic Jewish community. Of course, once filming ended, most of the participants, including Gerren, were deported to Auschwitz and murdered. The tragedy of this film lies not only in its deception, but in the fate of those coerced into participating. Prisoners who smiled on camera and sang patriotic songs were often sent to their deaths shortly afterward. Kurt Gerren himself, once a celebrated actor in Berlin, was forced to create propaganda for those who oppressed him, only to be murdered once his use to the regime had ended. His story symbolizes the ultimate cruelty of Theresienstadt. Even cultural expression, the very thing that brought prisoners hope, could be twisted into a weapon of manipulation. The truth behind the false presentation was known to the prisoners, who experienced the grim realities daily. Food rations did not improve after the Red Cross visit. Overcrowding persisted and deportations continued. The beautification campaign served only to intensify the cruelty. Prisoners were forced to create illusions of well-being that would mask their suffering and further facilitate Nazi crimes. Theresienstadt also functioned as a transit hub for Europe's Jewish cultural elite. The Nazis deported notable figures there first, using their presence to bolster the narrative of a protected Jewish settlement. Among them were famous musicians, scientists, artists, and scholars. Their survival in Theresienstadt was not due to mercy, but utility. The Nazis saw them as assets for propaganda and as hostages whose treatment might influence international opinion. Yet almost all of these individuals were eventually transported to Auschwitz or other camps as the war's end approached. The stories of these intellectuals highlight yet another dimension of camp life. Renowned musicians performed for audiences who might be deported the next morning. Professors delivered lectures on philosophy or literature to groups huddled in unheated rooms, determined to hold on to the idea that knowledge still mattered in a world that had turned irrational. Writers scribbled poems on scraps of paper, aware that each word might be their last. These cultural figures lent Theresienstadt a unique atmosphere, one of profound suffering interwoven with extraordinary intellect. Life in the ghetto was regulated by a strict system of labor assignments. Men, women, and even teenagers performed compulsory work: agriculture, construction, waste disposal, tailoring, carpentry, and various administrative tasks. Because labor was tied to survival, Those who worked sometimes received slightly better rations. Prisoners often accepted strenuous or dangerous positions. These jobs also created underground networks where people supported one another, shared information, or smuggled food. Small acts of solidarity helped many endure. Work crews often became makeshift families. People watched out for one another, sharing stolen potatoes or warning each other when SS guards were nearby. Even the harshest jobs, such as handling waste or working in freezing conditions, were endurable because of camaraderie. Survivors frequently recalled that it was not food or shelter that kept them alive, but human connection. These bonds, forged under extreme pressure, became the emotional infrastructure of daily survival. Religious practice, though forbidden publicly, persisted in quiet ways. Rabbis conducted clandestine study sessions, and holiday observances took place in hidden corners. These gatherings provided spiritual sustenance and a sense of continuity with traditions that the Nazis sought to destroy. Weddings and funerals occurred too, though stripped of their usual rituals and conducted under surveillance. The cemetery outside the walls grew rapidly, a silent testament to the mortality of the camp. For many prisoners, faith became a refuge. Even those who had not been religious before found solace in ancient prayers spoken softly in the darkness. Candle flames, when available, flickered with sacred significance. The rhythm of Hebrew words, the melodies of traditional songs, and the presence of community offered a sense of grounding amid chaos. These spiritual practices did not erase suffering, but they allowed prisoners to reclaim a part of themselves that the Nazis could not touch. Medical care in Theresienstadt was minimal but not non-existent. Jewish doctors, many of whom were leading professionals before the war, did their best with limited equipment and supplies. They established hospital wards, infant care rooms, and infirmaries. Despite their heroic efforts, malnutrition weakened patients' bodies, and disease, especially typhus and tuberculosis, was rampant. Children, the elderly, and the chronically ill were especially vulnerable. Medical staff often faced moral dilemmas when the SS demanded lists of individuals deemed unfit for labor, which in practice meant selection for deportation. Doctors in the camp often performed miracles with almost nothing. They improvised bandages from torn clothing, brewed medicinal teas from weeds, and reused scarce tools after sterilizing them over open flames. Their commitment to alleviating suffering, even when their own health was at risk, stands as one of the quiet triumphs of humanity in Theresienstadt. Many doctors knew they could do little to save lives, but they refused to abandon their duty. Treatment, however limited, was both an act of compassion and an assertion of professional dignity. As 1944 progressed and the tide of the war turned decisively against Germany, conditions in the camp shifted. Deportations accelerated in the autumn as the Nazis attempted to eradicate evidence of their crimes. Transports to Auschwitz packed with Theresienstadt prisoners departed even as Allied forces advanced into Eastern Europe. Cultural activities slowed as the population diminished and anxiety grew. But even then, some artistic work continued, a testament to the human need to express oneself even in catastrophe. The final months of 1944 saw an atmosphere of terror mixed with resignation. Prisoners could sense that Germany was losing the war, but this did not mean salvation. In fact, it often meant the opposite. The Nazis became more desperate, more violent, and more determined to complete their genocidal mission before defeat. Hope and fear coexisted uneasily. Some prisoners dared to imagine liberation, others feared they would be killed before that moment ever arrived. The final months of Theresienstadt were marked by chaos, overcrowding, and the collapse of Nazi administration. In early 1945, the SS began sending prisoners from other camps to Theresienstadt in death marches and emergency evacuations. Thousands of emaciated survivors from Auschwitz and other camps arrived, bringing with them disease and stories of the extermination process that left no doubt about what deportations had meant. A typhus epidemic swept through the camp, threatening to kill even more people before liberation. The influx of prisoners from other camps dramatically worsened conditions. Barracks that were already overcrowded became uninhabitable. Food supplies dwindled further, and sanitation collapsed. The newcomers, skeletal and traumatized, spoke openly of gas chambers and mass shootings. Their stories dispelled any remaining illusions about resettlement, confirming what many in Theresienstadt had feared but not fully known. This revelation, though horrifying, strengthened prisoners' determination to survive long enough to bear witness. In April 1945, the SS began to withdraw. Danish and Swedish humanitarian organizations negotiated the release of some Scandinavian prisoners, sending white buses to transport them to safety. Meanwhile, local Czech resistance groups prepared for the end of German control. On May 2, 1945, the International Red Cross took official responsibility for the camp's administration, and on May 8, Soviet forces reached the ghetto, liberating the remaining prisoners. The joy of liberation, however, was tempered by grief. For many, their families had been murdered. For others, their homes no longer existed. And for all, the trauma of their experience would follow them for the rest of their lives. Liberation did not come with immediate relief. Survivors were weak, many unable to stand or walk. Disease continued to claim lives even after the Nazis were gone. Doctors struggled to contain the typhus outbreak, treating patients in makeshift wards. Families searched for missing relatives, posting lists and hoping for any sign of life. Some learned the fate of loved ones quickly. Others waited months or years for closure. The sense of victory was overshadowed by the weight of loss. In the immediate aftermath, Theresienstadt became a site of medical triage and humanitarian intervention. Thousands required urgent care for malnutrition, disease, and psychological trauma. Doctors and nurses worked to control the typhus outbreak, which continued to claim lives even after liberation. Over the following weeks and months, survivors began the long process of searching for relatives, reclaiming stolen property, and attempting to rebuild their lives in a reshaped Europe. Rebuilding was not simply a matter of physical recovery, it required emotional reconstruction as well. Survivors wrestled with questions of identity, faith, and purpose. Some returned to their hometowns only to find their communities destroyed. Others emigrated, seeking new lives in new lands. Many discovered that silence was easier than recounting trauma. Yet others spoke tirelessly, determined that the world must never forget what had happened. Their testimonies helped shape historical understanding, legal accountability, and public memory. Theresienstadt's post-war legacy is both material and symbolic. Much of the town still stands today, preserved as a memorial to the victims. Museums, archives, and educational institutions document the history of the ghetto, displaying artworks, personal belongings, and testimonies that survived. But the true legacy resides in the stories of those who lived there, whose recollections preserved the truth against the Nazis' calculated lies. Walking through Terezín today, visitors can still see the barracks where prisoners slept, the courtyards where they gathered, and the crematorium where thousands were mourned. The silence of these spaces resonates deeply. They are not simply historical sites, they are graves of memory. Each building, each stone, carries echoes of footsteps, whispers, and prayers. The physical preservation of the town allows future generations to confront the reality of what occurred. The camp's cultural output has become central to its historical memory. The drawings made by children, the musical compositions produced in secret, and the writings of intellectuals have been studied, performed, and exhibited around the world. They remind us not only of Nazi brutality, but of human endurance. They are fragments of light from one of history's darkest corners. Yet Theresienstadt's significance extends beyond its cultural achievements. It embodies the perversity of Nazi ideology, which combined systematic violence with carefully crafted deception. The camp was designed to obscure the genocidal realities of the final solution, to create a facade of care while prisoners starved behind walls. It shows how propaganda can be weaponized as effectively as guns and gas chambers, and how a regime obsessed with appearances manipulated humanitarian institutions. The ethical dilemmas faced by the Jewish Council illuminate the moral complexity imposed on victims. Forced to carry out orders, often under threat of death, council members struggled to balance survival, responsibility, and compassion. Their decisions have been debated by historians and survivors alike, raising painful questions about agency, coercion, and the boundaries of judgment in extreme circumstances. Understanding these dilemmas is essential for comprehending the full scope of life in Theresienstadt. The story of Theresienstadt also forces us to confront the fragility of culture. Many of the camp's great artists did not survive. Their works reached us through chance, secret preservation, or the testimonies of those who remembered them. Each surviving manuscript or sketch is a reminder of an entire world of creativity that was nearly extinguished. When we engage with this art today, we honor not only the individuals who created it, but the countless others whose voices were silenced. Another dimension of Theresienstadt's legacy concerns its children. More than 15,000 children passed through the camp. Fewer than 2,000 survived. Their writings and drawings reveal inner lives shaped by fear, hunger, and uncertainty, yet full of imagination. Their deaths represent not only personal tragedies, but the destruction of whole futures. When scholars study children's artwork from the ghetto, they see the outlines of trauma, but also the courage of young people who tried to make sense of a world turned upside down. In the years after the war, survivors spread across the world, from the United States to Israel, from Western Europe to Australia. Many wrote memoirs or gave testimonies to organizations like Yad Vashem and the Shoah Foundation. Their accounts vary, reflecting the diversity of individual experiences within the camp. Some emphasize suffering, others highlight resilience or community. Together, they form a collective narrative that helps us understand the full reality of Theresienstadt. Historians studying the camp continue to uncover documents, re-evaluate earlier interpretations, and refine our understanding of how the ghetto functioned. Archival materials preserved by the Nazis, diaries hidden by prisoners, and post-war legal records all contribute to a picture of complexity. Theresienstadt was neither a simple prison nor a simple ghetto. It was a site of forced labor, starvation, propaganda, transit, death, and extraordinary cultural production. Its contradictions make it one of the most studied camps in Holocaust scholarship. Over time, Theresienstadt has also become a symbol in discussions about human rights, memory, and moral responsibility. It reminds us of the consequences of unchecked authoritarian power, the dangers of propaganda, and the necessity of international vigilance. Educators use its history to teach about resistance, creativity, and compassion under oppression. Museums host exhibitions that challenge visitors not only to mourn, but to reflect on their own ethical responsibilities. One cannot discuss Theresienstadt without acknowledging the deep emotional impact it has on those who study or visit it. The town is eerily quiet today. The barracks stand where they did during the war. The walls remain intact. Streets that once echoed with the footsteps of the starving are now lined with memorial plaques. The cemetery and crematorium bear witness to lives lost. To walk through Theresienstadt is to feel a palpable sense of absence, a reminder of how many stories ended there. On a more hopeful note, the memorialization of Theresienstadt has helped restore visibility to its victims. Schools across the world study the poetry of children from the camp. Orchestras perform works by composers imprisoned there. Scholars dedicate careers to preserving and interpreting its history. Communities come together each year to commemorate the liberation of the ghetto. These acts of remembrance ensure that the injustices of the past are not forgotten. Theresienstadt also offers lessons about the power of community. Despite the extreme conditions, prisoners formed strong social bonds. They shared food, taught classes, cared for the sick, and supported one another emotionally. Survivor testimonies often emphasize these acts of kindness as essential to endurance. In a setting designed to crush the human spirit, many chose solidarity over despair. To fully appreciate the significance of Theresienstadt, it is important to consider how it fits into the larger machinery of the Holocaust. While extermination camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka were sites of immediate mass murder, Theresienstadt served primarily as a holding and sorting center. But this administrative role does not diminish its brutality. The majority of its inmates ultimately perished in gas chambers or from starvation and disease. The camp's purpose was not to safeguard lives, but to facilitate their destruction in a more controlled and politically palatable way. In examining the historical record, it becomes clear that the Nazis used Theresienstadt to manipulate perceptions inside and outside the Reich. The camp's carefully staged propaganda film presented Jews as living in self-governed harmony under German oversight. This lie allowed the regime to deflect accusations of genocide for a time. Today, studying the mechanisms of this deception provides valuable insight into how governments can shape public opinion through misinformation. Theresienstadt also teaches us about the importance of documentation. Many prisoners risked their lives to record events, preserve letters, and hide artworks. Without these courageous acts, much of what we know today would have been lost. Their efforts demonstrate an acute awareness that preserving truth was itself a form of resistance. In times of authoritarian repression, documentation becomes a powerful tool for justice. Reflecting on Theresienstadt also raises questions about international response. The Red Cross visit of 1944, though constrained by Nazi manipulation, has been criticized for failing to challenge the facade more aggressively. Diplomats and other international observers, though sometimes suspicious, lacked the leverage or will to force transparency. This failure underscores the difficulty of responding to human rights violations when information is controlled by a repressive regime. It also highlights the need for vigilance, accountability, and independent verification in humanitarian oversight today. For the survivors, the trauma of Theresienstadt did not end with liberation. Many struggled with long-term physical and psychological consequences. Families were decimated, communities destroyed. Rebuilding life required immense courage. Some turned to art, writing, or education as a means of processing what they had endured. Others chose silence. Their diverse responses remind us that survival itself is not a simple victory, but a lifelong journey. Today, as new generations learn about Theresienstadt, educators face the challenge of conveying its complexity without diminishing its horror. It is easy to focus solely on the cultural achievements of the camp, because they offer moments of inspiration amidst darkness. But it is essential to remember the suffering that produced them. The music, art, and poetry of Theresienstadt were not created in comfortable studios, but in barracks of starvation, under the gaze of guards, within a system bent on extermination. They stand as both monuments to human creativity and memorials to immense suffering. In contemporary discussions of genocide, Theresienstadt is often cited as a case study in the manipulation of humanitarian perception. The camp's carefully staged appearance during the Red Cross visit prefigures modern strategies used by authoritarian governments to mask human rights abuses. Understanding these tactics is critical for activists, journalists, and international organizations working today to expose injustice. The history of Theresienstadt warns us that appearances can be engineered and that vigilance must be coupled with skepticism. At the same time, the story of Theresienstadt reinforces the importance of cultural heritage as a means of survival. Many survivors credit art, music, and literature with giving them the strength to endure. These creative acts fostered community, restored dignity, and provided brief moments of escape. They also created legacies that outlived the camp and continue to inspire future generations. Returning to the historical context, we should remember that Theresienstadt was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a vast network of ghettos and camps spread across Europe. Each had its own structure, population, and purpose. Theresienstadt's uniqueness lies in the combination of its propaganda role, its high concentration of cultural figures, and the extensive documentation that survived. But its cruelty was fully consistent with the broader Nazi program of dehumanization, forced labor, and extermination. Understanding Theresienstadt therefore contributes to our understanding of the Holocaust as a whole. One of the most striking aspects of Theresienstadt is the way prisoners reclaimed time. Even under strict schedules and labor demands, they carved out hours to teach children, practice music, write poetry, or study philosophy. In doing so, they resisted the Nazis' attempt to define their existence. They insisted on being more than prisoners or numbers on a transport list. Their pursuit of knowledge, beauty, and connection serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. The story of Theresienstadt also invites reflection on memory itself. How do societies remember trauma? How do individuals pass down stories of suffering and survival? Memorials, museums, books, and films all contribute to collective memory, but they cannot fully capture the lived experience of those who were there. Listening to survivors' testimonies, reading their diaries, and studying their artwork brings us closer to understanding, but a gap always remains. This gap is part of memory's function, to remind us that some losses are irreparable, some experiences beyond total comprehension. In recent decades, efforts to preserve Theresienstadt's history have included digital archives, educational programs, and scholarly conferences. New generations of researchers continue to uncover previously unknown documents. Genetic, psychological, and sociological studies have examined the long-term effects of Holocaust trauma on survivors and their descendants. The memory of Theresienstadt is therefore not static but evolving, shaped by ongoing discovery and renewed commitment to remembrance. As we reflect on Theresienstadt today, we might ask what responsibilities this history imposes on us. First, it demands that we recognize the capacity for cruelty that exists within human societies and the importance of preventing such atrocities. Second, it challenges us to identify and resist dehumanizing ideologies wherever they appear. Third, it encourages empathy for those who suffer under persecution today. And finally, it calls on us to honor the lives of those who endured and those who perished by keeping their stories alive. Theresienstadt's history also resonates with broader themes of dignity, solidarity, and resistance. Prisoners found ways to support one another, whether through sharing a scrap of food, teaching a lesson, or listening to a piece of music. These actions may seem small, but they were profound acts of courage in a setting dominated by brutality. They remind us that resistance is not always dramatic. Sometimes it takes the form of maintaining one's humanity in the face of efforts to destroy it. In telling the story of Theresienstadt, we acknowledge not only the crimes committed but also the human capacity for endurance and creativity. The camp's history is a mosaic of tragedy and resilience, oppression and expression, despair and hope. It is a story that continues to challenge, educate, and inspire. As long as we remember Theresienstadt, its survivors, its victims, and its cultural legacy, we uphold a commitment to truth and to the defense of human dignity. And so the legacy of Theresienstadt is multifaceted. It is a memorial to the victims of genocide. It is a testament to the power of art and culture under oppression. It is a warning about the dangers of propaganda and the complicity of silence. It is a chapter in the larger narrative of the Holocaust, offering insights into the mechanisms of persecution and the ways individuals and communities respond to unimaginable circumstances. Above all, Theresienstadt stands as a reminder of our responsibility to remember, not passively but actively, with a commitment to justice, education, and empathy. To speak of Theresienstadt is to honor those who were imprisoned there, to confront the cruelty of the past, and to ensure that the lessons it offers continue to shape our understanding of humanity. The story of Theresienstadt is long and complex, filled with sorrow, but also with moments of profound courage. By remembering it, we affirm that even in the darkest places, human beings have the capacity to create meaning, to support one another, and to leave behind traces of beauty that endure beyond suffering. Theresienstadt teaches us that memory itself is a form of resistance, a way of ensuring that truth outlives lies, and that humanity persists even when threatened by destruction. As we conclude this narrative, we carry forward the voices of those who lived within the walls of Theresienstadt. Their music, their art, their words, and their memories continue to speak across generations. It is through them that we understand not only what happened in that ghetto, but why it matters still. Theresienstadt is not merely a historical site, it is a call to conscience, a reminder that remembrance is both a duty and a promise that such suffering will never be forgotten, and that the dignity of those who endured will forever be honored. If you found this video meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps more people hear and remember these stories.